Welcome, Ndeye Diagne. You are the Managing Director for West African Insights Division of Kantar. Speaking to us all the way from Dakar in Senegal, we are so happy to have your Pan-African perspective on Biz Trends once again this year.
So much, Rutendo. I'm so glad to be with you at the 2023 Biz Trend event. Thank you so much for having me back again. Well, on trends, there are lots of things to talk about, especially in 2023, but I'll focus on one, and you'll understand why I'll focus on one. I guess last year I got struck by one phrase, climate hell. I really got struck by that phrase because in the past few years, we've talked about climate change, change in climate, change in environment, etc. And it was the first time that such a big word as climate hell was being said. And that was at the COP23 by UN Secretary General. And of course, world leaders use provocative sentences. They use big words and statements to make us get to understand that there's a lot at stake. And this one was really successful. So I think at that point, I did realize that there was something new happening. And of course, from climate hell to war in Europe, to inflation, soaring cost of living prices, and of course, at the back of the pandemic, it's a lot to process, a lot to deal with and to handle. And I think it's fair to say, it's pretty cliche to say that at this point in time, we've gone through so much change, and change is the only constant. But I think it's good to also have that realization that that we've been on a long ride so far. And businesses today, they're operating in a constant stream of change, of crises, of challenges, of concerns. So if there is anything that is the biggest truth today. And for me, I think where we've been through requires that we stop and pause and reflect. I think the amount of change as we've gone through it is really an opportunity to reflect, to do things differently. And I would even say it's a necessity to do things differently. So when we talk impact, to your point, I think I want to think of impact as a cause. I want to think of impact not necessarily in terms of what businesses are trying to create as impact, but more of what all of this has led to. And for me, there is one word. When I hear impact, and when I see where we've been, I think there is a need for us now to reconsider, to redefine courses, to change courses. And clearly, I think there is an inflection point right now because it's not been one crisis, it's been a lot of them. And we're getting to a point where we're realizing that this is our new normal, if we can say that word at all. Clearly, if we're thinking normal as life after 2019, well, we also have to realize that it's pretty much of a different world that we're living through. And we now have to accept that. I think there is an inflection point in the sense that we are realizing that we have to live with the world as it is today. And in history, we've heard a lot around the Great Recession. We've heard a lot around the Great Depression as well. And most recently in our world, we've gone through the Great Resignation. So that's the big quit, which we are still going through. There's a lot happening. The Great Reshuffle, some call it. And clearly, most recently, the Great Uncertainty. So for me, as a trends expert, I had to ask myself, if we're living in this world of greats, what's the next great? And to me, clearly, the next great is a time of refocus. I think what I do see from what's happening right now across the industries, for brands, for people, is a sense of urgency in terms of redefining course and refocusing. That's really what I want to focus on today, and that was what we see. I think we're entering an era of of focus, an era where people, businesses, brands, communities, we're all re-looking at where we want to be and refocusing on the systems, the processes, and the environments that will help us get there as human beings and professionals, as businesses, brands, and communities. I think when I heard the French president say something like, it's the end of abundance, I mean, so many people were very unhappy to hear about that, but that is just so true. So it tells us that the resources are finite, our resources are finite, and I think there is this really sober realization that everything's finite. And in as much as, we're very aware of that, I think it's a realization at scale. So that's what I call really the great focus, this new era where we prioritize things that are essential. We see that in the corporate world. I think to name Twitter, for example, when there was last year this warning of hardcore work, so many people just showed up and decided that, no, I'm going to focus on something else. And when I bring it to Africa, we also see in corporate Africa, a lot of high achievers, high performers who are trying to refocus on something else, things that will give them more meaning. We see that a lot, unfortunately, disproportionately affecting women. So that's clear. And at a consumer level, at a people or citizen level, there is this huge trend around migrations. We've identified this in Africa Life some time ago already, 3 years ago. In Nigeria, it's called Japa. So Japa meaning in Yoruba, escape or run away. So they call it the Japa movement or Japa syndrome. And it's just this reality of people facing our, severe circumstances we found ourselves and looking to focus somewhere else, to focus on their children's education, and then to leave their homes and their nations to go somewhere else. So we see that a lot. Our friends in McKinsey do say that the biggest export that we're going to see from now onwards is going to be from Africa is talent. And there's a lot to think about and to ask ourselves, especially for businesses, what does this mean? How do we come up and come up with the solutions in this moment? So I think for me, clearly, the great focus is a moment of prioritization, identifying the priorities that matter. It's really around everything. In terms of shopping, for example, it's going to be what are those essentials when I'm shopping. There will be downgrading. There will be, and there's a lot for brands to really identify how best to capture consumers spend in this context where they're downgrading and they're going to refocus on what's essential. And clearly, so for me, I also see that homemade will continue to be very, very important. It's not going to die. Do it yourself is going to be important. So what are those platforms, solutions, and tools that brands are going to bring to business, to people, to the consumers that they serve, so that they can also have a lot of autonomy in terms of things that they are doing. So for me, at a human level, when I think focus and those non-negotiables that are going to be identified, I think there is a golden thread which is value. The quest for value is really the golden thread, and it's going to be very, very important for brands and businesses to be aware of this. So, of course, the question will come: what are those essentials? And essentials mean different things to different people. And at the same time that people are downgrading from on consumer goods, for example, we will also see some other people prioritize leisure, for example, time off, beauty, fashion, gaming, entertainment. So there's a really lot, a huge scale of things that people are going to do, which comes back to something that is absolutely essential, which is consumer understanding. I think this time and going forward, that will continue to be absolutely critical. When we talk businesses, of course, what are those non-negotiables? And I think that's exactly what businesses are trying to identify right now. And the mass layoffs in the technology sector are unfortunately sending a very sour flavor, but that is what it is. It is also about focusing on the core, focusing on where they believe the future is, etc. And at a Kantar level, for example, that's exactly what we've been doing as well, refocusing on really delivering the best consumer understanding to the brands, and refocusing on brand building through better consumer understanding, simpler and stronger. So we will see more of these to happen, and we will need to learn to learn and accept that this is the new next. And of course, I can't close this without talking about sustainability, because if there is any one focus that's going to be important going forward, it's going to be sustainability. There is no brand that's going to be in the future to sustain if they are not baking into their strategies sustainability assets and strategies. So that is really, I think, a defining time. That's also what I got at a personal level when I heard everything around climate health. But when I say that, it's really important to also realize that when we say sustainability, we're not talking climate only. It's everything that really matters. It's environment. It's diversity. It's all those SDGs that we need to see how to incorporate, how to build into the strategies. Those are the strategies that are going to be successful. I think my invitation would be to perhaps look also at what we are doing at the Kantar level. We have a sustainability practice that is really creating a lot of very deliberately provocative content around sustainability, some great thinking to get your brands to be a catalyst in all things sustainability. So that's really, I think, where we're going. To me, the biggest trend and the biggest impact of everything that's happened is really this refocus, this great focus that we're going to see for people, individuals, brands, and businesses. So I think, in closing, I just want to say, clearly, if perma-crisis is the word for 2022, as identified by the Collins English Dictionary, though they said the word of the year for 2022 is perma-crisis. And I think if that is the word of the year, well, an urgency to stay grounded emerges in 2023, clearly. So that means a focus on the essentials. Nothing is impermanent, but everything is possible. So it's going to require for brands and for human beings a lot of focus, a lot of effort, and a lot of compassion. I think there's also time for compassion in everything that we do. That's going to be more and more important. And the framework that will be at play, I think, really is going to be reconsider what's at stake, refine how you show up as a person, as a brand, and keep focused.
Thank you for such an incredible and insightful presentation, Ndeye. I was absolutely, absolutely blown away. Thank you so much. I do want to ask, with our diminishing human attention spans and need for focus, what are the implications for consumers and for the relationship between brands and consumers? Essentially, what are consumers expecting, and what should brands be expected to deliver?
That's a very good question, Rutendo. I think at a time like this of uncertainty, what's going to be important is the search towards certainty, the search towards stability and sustainability. That's really what consumers are looking for. And they're watching and really looking into how brands themselves are responding to the world's challenges. And they're really expecting brands to show empathy, to share some of the burdens and to participate in the solutions. So I think what's really, really going to be important for both brands and people is to show compassion and a lot of authenticity. We've talked a lot about authenticity, and I think at times like this, authenticity is even more important. So I would really say, adding to the golden thread, which is the quest for value, that is really going to be the commonality around all expectations. I think the other things are really compassion, which they will expect from brands, and a lot of authenticity.
Ndeye, as part of the great focus, you've mentioned that people are migrating as well, which may result in a loss of talent. What should brands and businesses do?
That's another really, really good question, Rutendo. I think, especially as an Afro enthusiast and Afrocentrist, when I see what's happening and the great talent from Africa migrating for all the reasons that we know, I think we do have to ask ourselves a very big question, which is, how do we retain the talent? And I think that is something that's going to be a really hot and burning question for all brands across the continent. How do we make sure that we retain the talent? So the talent shortages and the talent war is already there, and Africa is now having an incremental burden, if I can use that term, of losing its own talent. Clearly, it's something that's going to keep all business leaders and brand owners on their toes. I think there's going to be a lot of focus that needs to be put on retention plans, on upskilling as part of those retention plans, on really offering trainings and creating and building environments that workplaces and environments that are going to foster well-being and that desire to stay. I think, when it comes to entrepreneurship, brands will have to also see to what extent they can also be part of that building of Africa through entrepreneurships. How do they enable them? How do they allow them to how do they invite them to co-create with them? So I think it's a question that can be easily answered, but it is definitely a super important question to put on the table and to start thinking. And small steps matter. What is non-negotiable here is not to do anything. And we all have responsibility to make sure that we contribute and do our part to make sure that we retain our talent.
Thank you for such an incredible and insightful presentation, Ndeye. I was absolutely, absolutely blown away. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be with you, Rutendo. Thank you again for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for BizTrends 2023 Big Impact. A special thanks to our sponsors, contributors, and readers. Catch all the latest insights this month on Biz.